This video is brought to you by Blessed Be God Boutique, maker of Catholic fashionable apparel, handmade accessories, and more.
The issue of vocations is something that we can never escape in the church. We are always talking about this vocations crisis. There's not enough priests to go around, and so bishops come up with rather inventive ways of addressing this problem. Typically by often assigning a priest to manage one or more parishes while the individual parishes are themselves actually managed by laity. The priest is there on Sundays, maybe another day of the week to hear confessions, and that's about it. He offers a mass or two, if you're lucky, at your parish, and then he goes to the next. And on he goes. I've visited parishes like this in the past. I've seen them firsthand. And the things that they are typically lacking are community and vocations. The parishes themselves produce virtually no vocations. So we have a report from the Pillar that kind of exposes this interplay. They go over the dioceses that are the healthiest, that produce the most vocations. And in their deep dive, they start looking at the kind of parishes that produce the most vocations. And what do you find? That it is always the dioceses that are the middle-sized dioceses that produce the most vocations. And in turn, that it seems that it's the parishes that offer the most face time with the priest that produces the most vocations. This won't surprise anybody, really, if you think about it. But it's good that a generally not ideologically driven news outlet in the church in America is looking into this, because maybe the bishops might pay attention and correct the course they're on. Because their course they are on, in the name of fixing the vocations problem, is to exacerbate it, to make it worse, to make the vocations problem infinitely worse. All the while implementing this synodal vision for the church, because at the core of synodality is a decentralization of church authority and the elevation of the laity. And what will that effect have? Well, if these numbers are correct, it will make the vocations problem in the church infinitely worse. So we go to Pillar Catholic with this headline: Small is Beautiful, suggests diocesan vocations study. Small. These are not like the super tiny parishes. These are not the mega, or not super tiny archdioceses, but these are not the mega dioceses either. These are not New York and Chicago that are having the best vocations per capita. It's actually the middle-sized dioceses, where the bishop is available as a resource himself, where your priests have the most face time with their laity. They tend to be the ones that produce the most vocations. And why is that? Is it because the middle-sized dioceses are the ones where orthodoxy tends to reign more, where there are just fewer external pressures on the church to conform to the secular religion, or is there something else going on here? Plenty of bad bishops in a lot of middling dioceses, by the way. We're not talking mid-sized dioceses being the place where the holiest bishops are going to be found. There's decent bishops in larger dioceses and not so good bishops in smaller dioceses. So this is more than just a good bishop equals good vocations issue. Let's turn to the Pillar for this. Quote, of nearly 150 U.S. Latin Catholic dioceses, only 16 of them have ordained enough priests in recent years to maintain their current levels of clergy, according to a new study. In the years between 2013 and 2023, not a single diocese serving more than 750,000 Catholics had enough ordinations to maintain its current level of priests, suggesting that when it comes to diocesan vocations to the priesthood, small is beautiful and often fruitful. In fact, the data indicates that bigger dioceses, where priests serve large flocks, are struggling to produce vocations at a replacement rate, while smaller dioceses, with priests serving fewer Catholics, are flourishing with priestly vocations. That information could be significant as ecclesiastical leaders consider the prospect of merging small dioceses in the United States. A 2025 report on the state of priestly vocations in the United States, published by the Vocation Ministry Organization, listed 16 small and medium-sized dioceses which defied a downward vocation trend in the U.S. over the past decade. In a table where a score of 100% meant that a diocese ordained enough priests to maintain clergy levels, the report presented the 16 dioceses producing priests above what they required for replacement rate, including growth over the decade. Wichita, Kansas at 255%, Nashville, Tennessee at 170%, Springfield, Illinois at 160%, Kansas City, Joseph 150%, Little Rock, Arkansas at 143%, Lincoln, Nebraska 140%, Patterson, New Jersey 128%, Fort Wayne, South Bend, Indiana, 123%. Covington, Kentucky, 120%. Sioux Falls, South Dakota, 115%. Bismarck, North Dakota, 110. Duluth, Minnesota, 110. Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, 110. Grand Rapids, Michigan, 105. Madison, Wisconsin, 103. And Arlington, Virginia, at 102. At the under end of the scale were several larger dioceses where ordinations fell well below replacement level over the same 10-year period. New York at 23%. Phoenix, Arizona at 23%. San Diego, California at 24%. Brownsville, Texas, 24%. Sacramento, California, 24%. San Antonio, Texas, 31%. Rockville Center, New York, 33%. Los Angeles, California, 33%. Fresno, California, 35%. San Bernardino, California, 36%. End quote. I know numbers can be tedious, but a few things that are interesting about this is that some of the worst dioceses here, one of them is San Diego, which is currently has Cardinal McElroy, who is in the process of transferring to Washington, D.C., has some of the worst vocations in the country. So he wasn't rewarded for his acumen at recruiting new priests. And it was one of the best dioceses in terms of vocations numbers is Covington, Kentucky. The bishop there is no friend to tradition in the slightest. He is very much a James Martin type bishop. So this isn't so cut and dry about good bishops and horrible bishops having good or bad vocations. There's something else going on here. Now the report goes on to point out that some of the worst performing dioceses weren't actually the huge archdioceses, but some of the middle to small sized dioceses spread across America. The key factor seems to be is the number of Catholics an individual priest serves at Mass, but not the way you might think. A priest needs to not be stretched so thin that he can't have personal time with his parishioners who want it. That seems to be key deciding factor here. So back to the article, quote, the new report suggested a link between the average number of Catholics a diocesan priest serves and ordination percentages. Ordination percentages decline when the diocesan average of the number of Catholics a priest serves exceeds 1,800, the report said. Clearly, a more personal, community-centered approach to priestly ministry is a key factor in fostering vocations. The report also sought to measure how accessible priests are to potential priesthood candidates in a given diocese. In dioceses where priests serve multiple parishes or large congregations, there is less time and energy for personal outreach or spiritual mentorship, the report said. Conversely, in dioceses where priests have fewer administrative burdens and smaller communities, they are better positioned to develop and foster these critical relationships. On the whole, the study found that priests are considerably more accessible to potential vocations in dioceses with fewer than 100,000 Catholics, and decidedly less accessible in dioceses with more than 750,000 Catholics. Priests serving smaller communities often have the unique opportunity to build close, personal relationships with parishioners, fostering a deeper sense of trust and connection, the report said, while acknowledging that such clergy often travel long distances between parishes, draining time and energy. End quote. The health of vocations is key to understanding all of this. All of this basically means that the more regular Mass attendees a parish priest interacts with, they tend to have better parish vocations if they have more face time. If the parish has a large number of parishioners, then you better have more priests to go with that. You need to have that personal connection between the priest and the laity. Otherwise, your parish will be thriving on paper, but in terms of the raw numbers, when you dive into them, and I bet this goes just beyond vocations, but also things like baptisms of children, sacrament of holy matrimony, how long are your confession lines, that sort of thing. And that should all make sense, right? We've probably all heard about the super parishes and dioceses. They'll have a lot of material resources even if the parish population is poor, and that same parish provides a disproportionately high number of seminarians to the diocese. Those super parishes are the model for the church, but of course, they are rarely used as examples for others to follow, probably because they are also usually more conservative about morality, and at least traditionally minded about liturgical practices. This is where you're going to find oftentimes your so-called unicorn mass, or other practices. This might be a Novus Ordo we're talking about. In fact, it probably is, just because that's 99.9% of them in the Latin West. But you'll see still women veiling at Mass, few, if any, girl altar boys, and communion given kneeling and on the tongue if the individual communicant wants it and they're not shamed for asking for it. But these parishes are also typically have more than one priest regularly at the parish, which allows for the parish to thrive. Even if that second priest is a regular visiting priest, someone who maybe is retired or religious or something, but a regular face to assist the resident priest. Now, what's happening in the church today is quite literally the opposite. They're doing what's called the parish cluster model, where a single priest is often serving 5 parishes, and that is the death knell for vocations. I saw this firsthand in New Jersey when I visited several years ago. It seems to be the model they're implementing nationwide in Germany for some reason, as if they just don't want the church to exist within a couple of generations if they go this route. And that is precisely what happens, because when you have a priest stretched thin over several parishes, he's rarely seen other than when he's offering the Mass. You might get confession once a week for 30 minutes at a parish. He offers 1, maybe 2 Masses if you're lucky, and that's it. You never see him again. What does that do to vocations? It destroys them, or it doesn't at least allow them to be fostered. But I'm curious, does any of this really surprise you? That really, if you want thriving vocations, you need to have adequate number of priests to give face time at a parish, to develop personal relationships with the laity there. Let me know what you think of this in the comments, please. And like and subscribe if you haven't. It certainly helps. So to sharing this on social media, that helps too. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.